Welcome to Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Sit back, relax, let me tell you a story. Today's story is the continuation of how the world works. Let's get into it. The air we breathe. I surround every living thing on the surface of Earth. From the ground to the high edge of the sky, I fill the space between land and space with a thin but persistent layer of gas. Gravity holds me close to the planet. Without that pull, I would drift away into the darkness beyond the atmosphere. Near the ground, I am dense enough to support life. Most of me is nitrogen. It moves quietly through the atmosphere and rarely reacts with other substances. Oxygen forms a smaller portion, but it is the gas most living things depend on. Small amounts of carbon dioxide, water vapor, and trace gases move through the mixture as well. Although the proportions are stable, I am never still. Heat from the sun warms the ground during the day. The surface warms the air touching it, and that warmer air expands and rises. Cooler air slides in beneath it to take its place. These constant changes in temperature and pressure keep the atmosphere in motion. Wind is simply air moving from higher pressure toward lower pressure. Across open land, the movement can be steady and slow. Over oceans, it can gather strength as large bodies of warm and cool air meet. In storms, the difference in pressure grows large enough to drive powerful currents that circle across continents and seas. As I move, I carry moisture with me. Water from oceans, lakes, rivers, and soil slowly evaporates into the atmosphere. The vapor mixes with the surrounding air and travels with it. When rising air cools, that vapor condenses into droplets and forms clouds. If enough droplets gather, they fall back to the ground as rain or snow. This constant exchange moves water across the planet. The same movement also spreads gases. Carbon dioxide released by animals, soil, fires, and industry mixes into the surrounding air and travels with the wind. Oxygen released by forests, grasslands, and oceans spread the same way. The atmosphere blends these gases until they reach relatively stable proportions again. Living organisms depend on this mixture. Each breath draws a small volume of air into the lungs. The air moves through the nose or mouth and passes down the trachea before branching into smaller airways called bronchi. These passages divide again and again until they end in millions of tiny air sacs. These sacs are called alveoli. Their walls are extremely thin. Each one is surrounded by a network of small blood vessels called capillaries. Oxygen in the inhaled air passes through the delicate membrane of the alveolus and dissolves into the blood flowing past it. Red blood cells carry the oxygen away. Inside the cells of the body, oxygen participates in chemical reactions that release energy from food. Carbon dioxide forms as a byproduct of those reactions. The blood carries that gas back to the lungs. When the next breath leaves the body, the carbon dioxide returns to the atmosphere. The exchange happens continuously. A resting adult breathes thousands of times each day. With every breath, oxygen enters the body and carbon dioxide leaves it. The same cycle occurs in birds, mammals, reptiles, and many other organisms that depend on oxygen to release energy from food. Plants interact with the atmosphere differently. During daylight, leaves absorb carbon dioxide through small openings called stomata. Using energy from sunlight, plants combine that carbon dioxide with water to produce sugars that support growth. Oxygen forms as a byproduct of this process and escapes into the surrounding air. The exchange connects plants and animals. Animals consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Plants use carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Wind mixes the gases and spreads them across the planet so the balance continues. The atmosphere also protects the surface of the earth. High above the ground, a layer of ozone absorbs much of the sun's ultraviolet radiation. Without that filtering effect, the surface would receive levels of radiation that would damage many forms of life. Even higher, the atmosphere slows objects entering from space. Small meteoroids strike the upper layers of the air at tremendous speed. Friction with the gas heats them until they burn and fragment before reaching the ground. The brief streaks of light seen at night are the result of that interaction. Although I appear transparent, I carry enormous influence. I move heat around the planet. I distribute moisture across the continents. I deliver oxygen to lungs and carbon dioxide to leaves. Every breath taken by every animal depends on the thin layer of gas held to the earth by gravity. I am the air you breathe, a moving mixture of gases that surrounds the planet, carries heat and water across its surface, and allows living organisms to exchange the elements they need to survive. Clouds. I am water that forgot how to fall for a time. My beginning is usually far below the sky. Sunlight strikes the surface of oceans, lakes, rivers, and wet soil. The energy spreads through the upper layer of water and begins to loosen the grip that holds individual molecules together. Some gain enough motion to escape the surface. They leave, one at a time. Each molecule lifts free and rises into the air as vapor. Nothing marks the moment. There is no splash or sound. The water simply becomes part of the surrounding air. The process repeats constantly. Across the surface of oceans alone, trillions of molecules rise every second. Warm tropical seas release the most. Cooler lakes and rivers release less. Wet soil and the surface of leaves also contribute moisture to the air above them. At first, the water remains invisible. Water vapor spreads easily through the atmosphere and mixes with the surrounding gases. Wind carries it upward and outward, distributing it through moving air that travels across continents and oceans. As long as the air remains warm, the vapor stays scattered and unseen. But air rarely stays in one place for long. When sunlight warms the ground, the air touching that surface warms as well. Warm air expands, the molecules move farther apart, and the air becomes less dense than the cooler air above it. Slowly, the warmer air begins to rise. The rising column carries water vapor with it. As the air climbs higher in the atmosphere, the pressure surrounding it decreases. The rising air expands into the lower pressure around it, and that expansion cools the air steadily as it continues upward. Cooling changes the behavior of the water vapor. Warm air can hold large amounts of water vapor without difficulty. Cooler air cannot. As the rising air loses heat, the vapor within it begins to slow and gather. But the vapor needs something to gather around. Tiny particles drift everywhere through the atmosphere. Dust lifted from dry land, salt crystals thrown upward by breaking waves, smoke carried from distant fires, pollen and fragments of plant material rising from the forest and fields. Each particle provides a surface. Water molecules attach themselves to these particles and begin forming droplets so small they cannot yet fall. Billions of them gather together in the rising air. That is when I appear. From the ground I form as pale shapes against the sky. At first I may appear as thin streaks or small scattered patches. Up close, I am a vast collection of microscopic droplets suspended in constantly moving air. The rising air continues to feed me. More vapor condenses. More droplets gather. Sunlight strikes their surfaces and scatter in many directions, giving me the bright white appearance seen from below. Where the droplets gather more densely, light cannot pass through as easily. Those regions appear gray, marking the thicker parts of the cloud. My shape depends on the movement of the air that forms me. When air rises gently across a wide area, I spread into broad layers. The droplets remain suspended in slow upward currents, and the cloud stretches across the sky in long, even sheets. When rising air becomes stronger, I grow vertically. Columns of warm air surge into cooler layers above. The droplets inside those columns rise rapidly while others sink along the edges. Circulation forms within the cloud, carrying moisture higher and higher into the atmosphere. At greater heights, the temperature falls below freezing. Droplets reaching these colder regions freeze into tiny ice crystals. Some remain suspended while others drift downward into slightly warmer layers, where liquid droplets still exist. Within this moving environment, collisions begin. Droplets strike one another and merge into larger droplets. Ice crystals collect additional layers of frozen water as they pass through the cloud. With each collision, the particles grow heavier. Upward air currents continue to support them for a time, but gravity never stops acting. As the droplets grow larger, their weight begins to overcome the lifting force of the rising air. They begin to fall through the cloud. During the descent, they often grow even larger. Falling droplets collide with smaller droplets and absorb them. Ice crystals gather additional moisture and build layered structures before breaking free from the cloud above. By the time they reach the lower atmosphere, they have become raindrops or snowflakes large enough to reach the ground. Rain falls through warmer air and strikes the surface as liquid water. Snow forms when frozen crystals travel through air cold enough to keep them solid during their descent. The water returns to the surface of the earth. Some flows across land into streams and rivers. Some sinks into soil where roots can draw it upward again. Much of it eventually returns to the oceans. There, sunlight begins the process again. Water warms. Molecules escape into air. Vapor rises and travels with the moving atmosphere until cooling gathers it into droplets once more. For a time, I remain suspended between earth and sky. Then the droplets grow heavy and gravity finishes the work that rising air began. I am clouds, water lifted from the surface of the earth, carried into cooling air, and held in the sky only until gravity draws it down again. Gravity. I am the force that gathers. Nothing I do is sudden. Nothing I do requires effort. Wherever matter exists, I am already there, drawing it toward every other piece of matter that surrounds it. The pull is small between tiny objects. It becomes powerful when enough mass gathers in one place. On the scale of planets and stars, my influence shapes everything. Long before oceans formed or clouds crossed the sky, I was already working. When the material that would become the earth drifted through space as scattered dust and fragments of rock, I began drawing those fragments together. Small grains met and clung. Larger pieces followed. Each new collision added mass, and with that mass my pull became stronger. Over time, the growing body gathered more and more of the material traveling nearby. Rock struck rock. Dust compacted into stone. Heat built within the forming planet as energy from countless impacts accumulated in the deep interior. Eventually, the scattered material became a world. The sphere formed not by design, but by the balance of my pull acting equally in every direction. Matter moved toward the center until the surface settled into the shape where every point lay at nearly the same distance from the planet's core. Once the planet formed, I continued my work. The atmosphere that surrounds the earth remains here because of me. Molecules of nitrogen, oxygen, and water vapor move freely through the air, colliding constantly as they drift and swirl. Without my pull, they would slowly escape into space. Instead, they remain bound to the planet. The same pull holds the oceans in place. Water responds easily to my influence. Every drop feels the attraction toward the mass of the earth beneath it. Lakes fill their basins. Rivers flow downhill across land. Rain that falls from clouds accelerates steadily toward the ground. Even the shape of the oceans reflects my presence. The surface of the sea settles into a smooth curve around the planet, always adjusting so that gravity pulls equally across its surface. Waves and currents may disturb that surface for a time, but eventually the water returns to balance. Movement across the land follows the same rule. Loose soil slides downhill under my pull. Sand shifts along desert slopes. Stones roll from steep mountainsides when erosion loosens their grip on the ground. Over long spans of time, entire landscapes respond to my influence. Rivers carve channels through rock as flowing water carries sediment downhill. Valleys deepen as gravity guides the movement of water and stone toward lower ground. Even glaciers creep slowly across continents, their immense weight pressing the ice outward and downward under my steady pull. Nothing resists forever. Mountains rise through forces deep within the planet, but once they stand above the surrounding land, erosion begins its patient work. Rain falls. Water freezes within cracks. Pieces of stone break loose and begin their descent. Gravity guides every fragment downward. What begins as towering peaks gradually becomes hills, then plains, as material moves steadily toward lower elevations. The process is slow but relentless, continuing year after year as long as the planet exists. My influence extends far beyond the surface. The moon remains in orbit around the Earth because my pull reaches outward into space. At the same time, the moon pulls gently on the Earth as well. The oceans respond to that distant attraction, rising and falling in slow cycles that we observe as tides. The planet itself travels through space under the same rule. Earth moves around the sun because the star's immense mass bends the path of the planet inward, while the planet's motion carries it forward through space. The result is a stable orbit that repeats year after year. The same principle shapes entire solar systems. Planets circle their stars. Moons circle their planets. Stars gather in enormous groups called galaxies, each one held together by the mutual attraction between billions of stars moving through space. Across the universe, my influence links matter to matter. The pull may weaken with distance, but it never disappears. Every object with mass contributes to the network of attraction that fills the cosmos. The force between distant galaxies is small, yet it still exists, quietly connecting structures separated by unimaginable distances. On the surface of the earth, my presence is constant. When a raindrop falls from a cloud, I guide its descent. When a river flows toward the sea, I direct the path. When soil slides down a hillside or a stone falls from a cliff, it moves according to my pull. Even the air itself responds. Cooler, heavier air settles downward, while warmer air rises above it. Storms form when differences in temperature and pressure cause vast masses of air to shift and circulate through the atmosphere. Every movement eventually returns toward balance. The direction of that balance is always downward, toward the center of the planet where the combined mass of the earth draws everything inward. You feel my presence in every moment of your life. Your feet press against the ground because I hold you there. Every step you take works against my pull for an instant before your weight settles again. Yet despite my constant influence, I act quietly. I do not burn like fire. I do not flow like water. I do not move with the wind. My force operates without sound or visible motion, shaping the paths of objects across the surface of planets and through the vast distances of space. I am gravity, the force that gathers matter, holds worlds together, guides the fall of rain, and binds the motion of planets and stars throughout the universe.